In everybody. This will be the last meeting of this committee this year, so there are some treats for everybody. But first of all, can I give a warm welcome to Sharon Doherty, who is joining us as the Roman Catholic Deaconess Rep, and she's sitting over there near Keith, who's here instead of Lisa as the Parenting Rep. We've had some messages that people are stuck in traffic, but obviously the public are watching, so I'm going to start on time. There are no planned fire alarms or anything else. So are there any apologies for absence?
We have an apology from Councillor Lamas, and Councillor Lawrence is substituting, and we also have an apology from Councillor Pearce.
Lovely. I have an apology from Councillor Hamilton, and we've got the Deputy Mayor Marion covering, and also, unfortunately, the Sharon, Leah, and Satinder are running late. Okay. So we're on to the next item, which is the records of the last meeting. I read the minutes. Any corrections? Sorry about my voice, I've got a cold. Okay. No.
Agree the minutes, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, on to any other urgent matters. None? Great. Number 4, disposory pecuniary interests, whipping or otherwise. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Joe. On the draft capital and revenue budget for 24-25, when this matter was discussed last week at business support, mention was made of increased charges on private landlords. I'm a private landlord, so I'd just like to declare and just preempt in case that does come up in the discussion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Liz?
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, exactly the same issue. I'm also a landlord, so it does affect me, that change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so obviously we are thematic in our children and young people's services. So what I would like you to think of is this week, last week, today, hopefully, any interaction you've had with any young people, and hold that in your mind, because they are the people that we're here to represent, and our decisions do reflect on each and every one of them. And then I'm going to hand over to our wonderful finance team, who are here to do their presentation.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll try and whip through this presentation nice and quickly. Virtually all the information that's in the slides is in the agenda pack as substantive items. So we'll just focus on what's not in such great detail in the agenda pack, if that's okay. So next slide, please. We'll just cover the services and budget responsibility of this committee, whip through the current year forecast for both revenue and capital, and then a bit on how we're working to develop the budget for next financial year. Next slide, thank you. So ONS committees have always been responsible for supporting the budget areas within their remit in terms of the budget development for future years. So we've always been consulted on the draft budget as they are tonight. However, in previous years, the budget monitoring only went to business support ONS after Cabinet, but from April this year, overview and scrutiny committees are all responsible for budget monitoring for their remits. So that's just why the monitoring reports are on here, please. Next slide. So that's just a recap of the services this committee is responsible for in line with the terms of reference. However, the Council's budget and budget build is based around the operational directorates. So you will actually see the budget reports. We present some elements to this committee and to HASC as well, because obviously Public Health Directorate, Management Team, etc. are the responsibility of both. Next slide, please. And I'll hand over to Dave.
Thanks. So just a little bit about kind of the difference between the school grants and what is the general fund. So the general fund refers to the council's main account, with all expenditure really funded by council tax, business rates, and kind of non-ring-fenced and ring-fenced grants. And that's where the majority of council services are funded through the general fund. The council has some other standalone accounts, such as the Housing Revenue Account, which is known as the HRA, and there are also some ring-fenced grants, such as the Dedicated Schools Grant. The Dedicated Schools Grant is a ring-fenced grant from government that provides each local authority with an allocation of funding for schools and services for pupils. And then there are some specific regulations and accounting codes that dictate what we're actually allowed to charge to that grant. And largely that is around kind of SEND pupils. However, the council also delivers some specific school functions which are funded from the DSG. So funding for schools like general elements like admissions, school improvement, but also some more specialist functions like special and alternative provisions are funded out of DSG. So I won't spend much more time on that particular list because we'll move on next. So this slide is just a slide of what the overall budget is. So the next 3 slides kind of set out what the budget are for the services look like in the current year. Within the CYP portfolio, the total budget responsibility is around £209 million. So that represents around 50% of the council's net revenue budget for 23-24. So again, I mean, I won't go through it in any great detail, but you can see there are some, as we said from the earlier slide, there are services that are funded out of the general fund and some funded from DSG, and there are some specific grants, but there are, within these budgets, there are also some grants which are kind of netted off on the funding side, so you don't see them explicitly within these tables. Next slide, please. So within children's services, there is fully funded out of the general fund. Again, quite a significant portion of the overall spend within this committee is within children's services, so there's £17 million, and a large part of that is placements. But we'll cover that a little bit more when we get to the kind of the revenue monitoring position. And the final slide on this particular section is just around the other areas that are within CYP kind of portfolio. So there's a bit around children's commissioning within partnership commissioning. We've put all of the public health grant in there. In reality, some of that is not children's focus, but just for ease, we've put it in there. The public health grant, although it's kind of shown as general fund, is actually funded through a ring-fenced public health grant. So we need to spend all of our public health grant on public health services that deliver outcomes related around public health. And then there are a couple of additional grants at the bottom which are around Start for Life funding and Holiday Activities Fund, which are delivered mainly through our public health team, but in kind of partnership working with children's services on both of those. So that's that. Then on to Mariah. Quick.
Okay, so thank you. On to the Dedicated Schools Grant. The DSG is split into 4 individual blocks of funding. Each block has its own set of guidelines, rules and regulations of how we are allocated the funding and how we can distribute the funding. So as you can see, the 4 blocks are the schools block, the Central Services Schools block, the High Needs block and the Early Years block. So as an example, on the schools block, there is a mandatory 99.5% pass-through rate that Medway Council have to pass through and into schools and academies and our providers. The other 0.5% can be transferred to one of the other 3 blocks within the DSG. Whereas if you look at the Early Years block, for example, it has a mandatory 95% pass-through rate to our providers, and the other 5% can be retained by the local authority. The next slide, please. As well as the DSG, which we have overall control of really on how we distribute it, there are also other specific grants that really Medway just acts as the postman for. So we're told the grant allocations by central government, they give us those grants and we passport those funding grants straight to our schools and our academies if they were ours at the beginning of the year. The majority of the time, the ESFA will pay the academies their funding. So as you can see, I've set out a selection of those grants that we have, but that's not an exhaustive list. There are other grants that we give out as well as those. Next slide, please. The one that's most important is the schools block, where we distribute out around about 235 million via the schools and academy funding formula, which is something some of you may have heard. That is a way to transport funding to schools and academies in a fair and transparent way. The formula is based on a particular forum that has to go to the schools forum, and they will agree the formula after we consult with schools. So it's quite an important formula that actually is approved by central government, and we send up 2 reports. The first one is a provisional report, and the second one is a final report that goes up in February. But that final report is after we have to submit the return to central government. So on that report, every year we ask Cabinet to actually waive their calling rights. So what we do ask for is if the ONS committee want to call that paper in, we ask for it to be called on the provisional formula and not the final one, to allow us to submit that return to central government. Next slide, please. I think it's over to you.
Thanks. So there's just a few slides on the current revenue budget monitoring position for 23-24. They're just covering the areas that are within the CYP portfolio. So the first slide is around children's services. So the current projected overspend is £1.9 million, although that's an improvement of £1.5 million from what was reported, the £3.4 million overspend that was reported in round one. Most of the overspend is of 1.4 million is driven by packages of support to stabilise existing packages and placements, so that children and young people can remain with their families where it's in the best interest. The other major pressure is around unaccompanied asylum seeker children. The forecast has the capacity to go up to 65 placements as per our kind of allocation, national allocation. But there is a projection and a profile to get to that over the year. And then finally, there's kind of some high numbers of uncovered vacancies that are driving a staffing underspend that reduces that pressure by more than £1 million. We're currently working on the round 3 kind of forecast now, and we'll be reporting that to Cabinet alongside the proposed budget in February. Next slide, please. So this is just a very quick slide on around kind of what makes up some of that overall placement cost, just to give you a feel for the number of placements that we've got. So as you can see, we've currently got 488 kind of, or as at round 2, we had 488 children in actual placements spread across fostering care placements, in IFA kind of placements. You can see that there's the unaccompanied asylum seekers, and also we've got some residential and some unregulated placements as well. Yeah, if you move on to the next one, please. Again, the other significant area within kind of this portfolio is the education budget, and again, we're currently projecting a 1.73 or 1.7 million pound overspend at round 2, which is a marginal kind of increase from what was reported in round 1. Again, that is largely around the cost of SEN transport. Final slide around on what we're saying about revenue budget monitoring is just a brief update on where the SEND pressures within within kind of the DSG. So we've entered into the safety valve programme. As at the 31st of March, our DSG deficit reserve stood at 21.4 million. The plan should be that reduces to 19.3 million by the end of the current financial year. The deficit recovery plan and the safety valve funding in combination are projected to remove that deficit and return the DSG to a balanced position by the end of 25-26. But just to note, we have moved £3 million to an earmark reserve to kind of effectively ensure against under-delivery of that deficit recovery plan. Obviously, we're working to make that plan work so that we can hopefully return that sum to the Council's reserves if possible. Okay, on to capital.
Thank you. So this slide details the financial position of the capital programme as at round 2. So the capital programme for this area totals almost £43 million. Almost £36 million of that is funded by grants, with £4 million of developer contributions and around £3.5 million of borrowing. The majority of the programme, which is more than £40 million, is about delivering additional school places across mainstream and SEND schools, including bulge classes and the creation or delivery of facilities to support schools grow. There is a forecast overspend of 21,000 within SEND on the Bradfield scheme and a forecast underspend of 26,000 at the Abbey Court scheme. That results in net overall underspend of 6,000. The Director of People has approved environments in October to move those budgets to give that overall net position. Other places, there's £136,000 of schools' own capital funds, which are grant funded by the Department for Education via the Education Skills Funding Agency, which are used to address their own priorities and improve educational standards and enhance the environment for teaching and learning. There's £775,000 of spend on condition programme within schools, which provides both planned and reactive works including boilers, heating, roofing, electrical, water management, fire risk and security. The remaining £1.4 million is a scheme to deliver a children's assessment centre at Eden House with future works at Oak Even and the cabin, and some funding to implement accessibility improvements and internal works to a number of existing family hubs to support the Start for Life programme.
Thanks, Andy. So, well done for hanging on in there. We're on the home straight, I promise. We're on the draft budget for next year. So local authorities have a statutory duty to balance their budgets. Essentially, we have to calculate how much we'll spend to deliver services, less how much we'll get through certain grants, and the difference is how much we have to raise in council tax. So because council tax limits increases are limited by the referendum limit, that's why we are in a difficult situation trying to balance the budget effectively. So we've been working to develop the balanced budget since summer. We presented the medium-term financial outlook to Cabinet in September, and that set our initial projections for income and the cost of services. And then we presented the capital strategy to Cabinet in October, and that set out the aspirations for capital expenditure. The draft budget for 24-25 was presented to Cabinet on the 21st of November, and in accordance with the Constitution, this committee has had it referred to it to comment on the proposals ahead of the budget setting in February. Next slide, please. So the draft budget represents the introduction of a new approach this year. So each directorate is going to be working to operate within an agreed budget allocation. The starting point to arrive at those budget allocations was the current year budget, so no one's looking at a cut. When we produced the MTFO, we thought that we would have £21 million of more income next year than we have this year. So we assumed that we would fund a pay uplift, address the one-off use of reserves in the current year budget, and then increased each budget by a share. And effectively what's happened is all of the available resources left after those corporate priorities are reflected in the additional growth in Children and Adults Directorate, obviously, of which CYP are a really important part. One thing to note is just that the allocations set out in the report reflect an assumption that we've either made savings or revised the assumptions, or additional income will be generated that's equal to the potential budget gap, which obviously stands at a rather scary 35.798 million. That next slide, if you wouldn't mind moving on, is just what that draft budget actually looks like. One simple table. You can't really see the numbers on that screen, obviously, but just to make super clear everyone understands what that shows. So the first column there is the current year budget. Then all of the pressures identified in the MTFO and since are in that next column, along with all the additional income that we're forecasting at the bottom. And then that gives the budget requirement for each directorate. Then there's the amount each directorate needs to save in order to live within that budget requirement. And so that's why we end up with what looks like a balanced position at the bottom there. Next slide, please. These are the specific pressures which are reflected in the draft budget within the remit of this committee. They're all detailed in the draft budget, so I'm not going to talk to them line by line. But they primarily reflect higher levels of placement costs experienced in the current year continuing. They also reflect some demographic growth and inflationary uplifts alongside that UASC pressure. And another key pressure being around the sort of send transport. They cumulatively make up the big numbers. Next slide, please. So there is significant activity already underway to balance that budget. I think the kind of lead times for us to produce reports like the draft budget mean that none of that had progressed sufficiently to be reflected in the financial projections in the draft budget within CNA. So there's a brief outline there on the slide of what that work looks like. It's detailed more in the draft budget report. And I think it's really important to note that the Directorate continues to use all the available avenues to it, all peer networks, etc., to lobby the government to allocate more resources to supporting social care, but also to introduce a fairer funding mechanism that would mean that we believe organisations like Medway would see an increased share of those national allocations based on need. And you'll be glad to know the next slide is my last slide. So just a bit of a recap on what happens next. So the provisional settlement, which actually determines in pounds how much Medway Council will receive through government funding, is expected to be laid before Parliament via a written statement on the day that Parliament rises, i.e. the 19th of December. So I'll have a cracking Christmas writing a Cabinet report about that. A series of meetings are underway between the senior leadership and the relevant portfolio holders. So they're scrutinising those assumptions that are in this draft budget to make sure that we aren't just over-projecting or double-counting, etc. They're looking at all the options that are available, and this is across the council now, to increase income, reduce costs, including sort of longer-term investor-save type activity. The results of those meetings are being put to members for formal approval following the usual governance processes, so largely they'll be in the Cabinet report in February. As part of that work, we're reviewing the capital programme itself, so we're looking at what the assets the council holds and whether all of those need to be retained, and we're looking at our balance sheet to see what we might be able to do in terms of further savings or income opportunities or moving reserves around. Council has invited external experts to carry out some reviews. This is again detailed in that draft budget report. So those reviews are underway, and we're anticipating some feedback this side of Christmas, and that we'll be developing more formal action plans early in the new financial year. So obviously this is everyone's focus, so that we can present a balanced budget to Council and Cabinet in February. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Finance team, and thank you for the hard work you're doing. And also I want to thank the current Cabinet members, because I don't often get the chance, but I looked at, I think it was Business Committee or one of the committees, and someone that was in the former Cabinet didn't realise we were not giving people £5,000 pay rises because they didn't work out that there were pension and on costs, yet they were running the Cabinet here. And I'm really disgusted that the autumn statement had nothing for children, nothing for families, and nothing for schools. And also that our Cabinet is in this position because not only did they leave a deficit, they only spent the reserves as well. So we are in a very difficult situation. So I'm going to open up the floor for questions. And because it's finance, and we've had a lot to read, I'm probably going to take a few questions at a time, and we'll deal with them in 3s and 4s. Thank you. Kay Smither, it's over to you.
It's just me. Thank you, Jo, and thank you to your team, the finance team. You're obviously doing the rounds of all the committees with these slides. I'm sure you won't even need the slides by the end of this process. You'll know it all. I have a couple of comments. The children and adult services, the saving requirement is 22.6 million, is that right? I just wanted to ask how those savings will be achieved. What's the thinking, initial thinking around that? I guess my concern is that I understand that no statutory services will be cut. I understand that will be protected. But there must be something that's sacrificed here, and I'm really concerned that it'll impact the lives of children in Medway. So I'd just like some reassurance around that, and also some clarity around how those savings will be achieved. Where it says provider uplift of 5.4% has been factored in, how is that calculated? Does that compare with sort of provider uplifts across the sector, across other councils? Is that a standard kind of benchmarked kind of calculation? And then where it says agency provision, you've got 629 million. I assume that's related to your staffing issues, where you're having to rely on much more expensive agency staff. So I know you're working on addressing that and hiring more social workers to fill that gap. When do you see that beginning to have an impact on the budget, so that kind of huge outlay isn't happening towards agency pay? And I kind of wanted to amplify the comment on, which page is that? Page 23, where it says, the Directorate continues to use all available avenues, including peer networks, to lobby the government to allocate more resources to supporting social care. So I guess my thoughts are that the government we have now has systematically eroded funding for our social care and our children's services. And not just that, but the previous administration and Medway Council has shown just blatant disregard for how to manage and steward the finances of this council. I was in Business Support Committee last week, and we had somebody from the previous administration say, well, we have always balanced the budget. It's business as usual that we eat into our reserves, and that's how we balance the books. That kind of attitude will go some way in explaining why we find ourselves in this hole, if that is the kind of, laissez-faire attitude towards budgets. So I guess, and they have had 20 plus years of governing Medway with their own government in power for 13 years. And they have failed to lobby their own government for more equitable distribution of funding for local authorities. You know, so I guess I want to ask, how can this committee assist you in lobbying the government for a more equitable, sensible, reasonable funding allocation to Medway Council? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll start off, and then I think there might be other colleagues that I call upon to answer some elements of it. In terms of the £22.6 million savings target that's against the Directorate in the draft budget, I think the report sort of tries to articulate some of the work that's underway. So I think the first thing I'll say is that that gap is arrived at by a series of projections, and you've picked up on that in one of your later questions, that we've, at a point in time, looked at what our current caseload looked like and what all of those placements were costing us, what our current staffing position looked like and what that was costing us, and we've made some projections about that. Now, there's lots of work underway at the moment to review those original projections against more up-to-date data to see whether any of those are over projections in the first place, to see whether there's any potential for any kind of double count between two sets of projections, for instance, the placement packages that transfer between children and adults potentially, so we're looking at all of that stuff. So it's possible that some of those projections are higher than they need to be or than they will be in reality. So that's one strand of work. Then in the report we talk about so in children's, there's clearly a well-publicised issue about the provider market, and level of profit that's being made by providers is a nationally publicised issue, and there's not tons that we can do necessarily about that locally, but I'm sure Leanne and her team might want to say some of the stuff that they're doing about how we can work to better support the provider market locally. I think I'm sort of straying between your questions here, but your question about agency provision and is that about reliance on agency staff, absolutely that's what that's doing. I think for us, one of the key areas of work will be for the service to capitalise on that move to good, that really significant jump from the previous Ofsted rating to the current Ofsted rating. And I've seen some really moving materials that have been produced by the Directorate as part of its latest recruitment campaign, which really seek to capitalise on that. And obviously we hope that that makes us a much more attractive employer in and of itself. I'll quickly talk to your last question about what local authorities are doing and how the committee might be able to help us in terms of lobbying for fairer funding. And then if it's all right with you, I'll pass the provider uplift question to James. I think the tricky situation is that the government could argue that they have put a fairly significant settlement in place. So the current settlement looks like something like 9% increase for local authorities. I think the issue is for us that the cost of providing care and the complexity of need is rising far faster than that proportion. And the fundamental issue for local authorities is that the government funding represents a relatively small proportion of our budget. If you look at the draft budget as a whole on something like £400 million budget, 150 million of that is council tax and 60 million of that is business rates. And they're capped. We can't drive those up, and they're not increasing in the same pace as things like inflationary pressures. I think what the committee might be able to help us to do is by talking to your MPs, is by supporting us in the activity that we're already doing. So we lobby through people like the Local Government Association, through the associations for the directors of children's services, for instance. We're lobbying through all of the finance avenues that we can. And I think what's really disappointing about the autumn statement is it confirms that the Fair Funding Review, which I think has been kicking around in government since 2016, is again deferred into the next Parliament. And I think it might not be massively material, but we're fighting for Medway to receive what we think would be its fair share of every pound of national quantum. I don't think necessarily the government is going to be able to magic up significant additional quantums of funding for local government, but if we were getting a share that was more fairly based on the needs of the people in Medway, then that would go some way towards closing our gap, I think. James, do you want to cover the provider uplift assumption, if that's okay? Thank you.
Yeah, so It's a complicated situation, as you can imagine. What we have developed in the last couple of years is some both regional and national forums where I will speak to my counterparts in other areas and we'll share the information about what we're going to offer providers, what's gone forward. So actually we're not being played off against by any other local authority, which is really important because, you know, we wouldn't want to give a provider, you know, 5.4% if somebody else is only giving them 4%. So we try and find what we would see as a balanced middle ground with that. The other thing that we're doing, just to kind of provide some reassurance as well, is all of the packages and all of the placements we make now, we have a very clear financial breakdown of what that looks like. So, you know, somebody can't just say, oh, it's £3,000 a week, just take it. We're saying, okay, how much of this is accommodation? How much of this is staffing? How much of this is this? And we try and, with as many providers as possible, have I suppose it's a quasi-open book accounting sort of discussion with them where we will go through the numbers with them, and if we think actually their profit margin's a bit high or they're saying that they're paying their auxiliary staff a little bit more than we know the market rate is, then we'll have those discussions with them to move down. The other thing that I should add to that is there are so many different contracts across the piece. Some are spot contracts, some are framework contracts. For example, we've got one with KCC, so we have to make sure that we line up with what they do as well. So it's not a flat fee. There are other things that we wouldn't have to pay those uplifts on because we've got very, you know, rigid agreements about that as a fixed price for a set amount of time. So it's a real kind of varied picture around. We're not just going to give everybody that rate as standard. But from what we can see at the moment, that is about the middle ground on what other local authorities are looking to give us an uplift. Below the CPI rate, but, you know, still have a reasonable level.
Thank you. Back to Smitha.
Just to wrap up the discussion, yes, the government could say that settlement has been made and increased settlement has been made, but if it doesn't meet the need, it's inadequate. And it's just not fit for purpose if something as critical as children's services cannot be protected through government funding. But anyway, that's not for you to answer. In terms of the increased outlay towards agency staff, I know you can't give a time frame as to when you expect to start seeing that reducing, but it would be good for this committee to see in time how that cost is brought down by improving in-house recruitment.
I probably should have clocked this actually when we were talking, but I was struggling to remember exactly which pressures related to which service. But that 600,000 is actually in adult social care, isn't it? I think what we've done in previous budget builds is reflected that there's a certain element of the children's social care workforce which is agency staff, and that we've funded the pressure that would generate. So that's not a pressure anymore, it's something that we built into the base. So I suppose over the medium term, if we were to see a move to more permanence, then we would expect to be able to generate some savings through that. But I think in terms of permanence and staffing, I think we're probably talking in years, not months, but if I'm honest.
Chair, can I? Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting question. It's one that Children's Services have grappled with that challenge through the improvement journey. Medway is not the only local authority who has this challenge. It's a national issue. But on the back of the good ILAC's judgment, we have had some success. There are some agency workers who have made a definitive choice to come and work for Medway. It's not always easy to get social workers to work for an inadequate local authority just because of the challenge of being inadequate. That has turned, but it would be wrong for me to sit here and let you think that there will be a big shift in terms of agency to permanent staff. It's a work in progress. We can make gains and then we can lose. Our neighbours, for example, may make a better offer in terms of salary or benefits. It's a very fluid market, but I am heartened that we have agency workers who have chosen Medway to become their permanent employer.
Anybody else?
I was going to say, as at probably the end of last week, there were 75 social worker agency members of staff actually working across the Children and Adults Directorate, which is approximately about 20% of the workforce.
George.
Thank you, Joe. I mean, just firstly, I think I need to address the comments made from colleagues opposite. First of all, I think, look, we fully appreciate the challenges, particularly in social care at the moment. I think that's certainly acknowledged by myself and the Leader of the Opposition. I think just in terms of some of the wider comments, that the Chancellor's got difficult decisions to be being taken. And I think both, him and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury outlined that in the autumn statement, which was pretty clear, I think, certainly to us in terms of the decisions that they've had to take in order both to ensure that longer-term decisions are taken for the country moving forward. Just in terms of the point about lobbying government, I think everybody on the council would expect all 59 councillors to be lobbying for more money for the council, every opportunity and all staff. So I don't really think we need those sort of sarcastic comments, to be frank. Coming to some questions from me, just on page 22, and I know Leanne was just talking about this, about recruitment and if we're finding it easier to recruit. I just wondered how some of those newer mechanisms of recruitment we were looking at. I think at the previous meeting we were sort of talking about potentially some PPC spend and LinkedIn. Just be interested to know if we'd had any sort of progress on those sort of campaigns for recruitment. And then just the other question, probably for Katie, on page 53, just about the net forecast underspend on 22 uncovered vacancies, and just when we're sort of envisaging they will be filled. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Okay, in terms of LinkedIn, I don't know. I think that has to go over to Kelly, might be able to give a bit of a better answer than I can. In terms of the uncovered vacancies, that was at a specific point in time. We are always increasing them or reducing them. They move on a daily basis effectively, our social work staff numbers.
Hi. I think as Leanne shared, it's early days in seeing the impact of our new recruitment campaign, and as Katie shared earlier, our video is out there, our recruitment video is out there, and what we are seeing is a higher number of applications that are coming in for roles as they're being advertised, and there's huge interest currently for Medway and our vacancies. So I think it's early days, but the impact is starting to be seen.
Okay, can I take Adrian, then Andrew, please?
Thank you, Joe. It's interesting to read the summary revenue budget forecast position in the table at 5.1. We see that from round one, where we had a budget requirement of 17.26 million, that is now down to 12.747 million, a drop of some 5 million, which, to my memory, is almost exactly as has happened over the last 8 years of which I've been on this council. So very much in that respect, it seems to be business as usual. It's also interesting to look at that, the accompanying text and see the way that £5 million has been, reduction's been got at. Most of that work, the vast majority, it seems to be work that's done by the officers. The only public announcements from the administration of how they're going to save money to reduce our budget pressures has been 75k to scrap Christmas lights and another 75k to abolish the free parking on Mondays. I worked that out as being 0.869% of the 17 million budget. That is the total sum of all the efforts from our new administration in reducing the budget. Pretty poor fare, isn't it? We seem to have a policy here of trying to inflict the maximum amount of pain for the absolute minimum amount of financial gain. I'd also like to specific question. It mentions the plan for the safety valve. Could officers please give us an indication of what specific measures are in place to keep that plan on track? Because there is a hint within the text that is going to be difficult to achieve. So I would like to know what specific measures are in place for that. And I'm going to ask the same question as I asked at the last meeting of this committee. Where are we with Eden House? Because Eden House is a very good, potentially a very good provision that will save us very expensive expenditure in outside placements, and yet it's still not in commission. We keep getting told the commission is imminent, people are in place and all the rest of it, but we don't seem to have an opening date of where our young people from Medway can actually take up residence at Eden House. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Katie. Could you answer?
Thank you. I'll start and take the first 2 points, and then I'll... Sorry, Celia and Mariah, and then James for the last point. That's okay. So in terms of, yes, we have previously reported overspends at round 1, which have typically grown to round 2. I think the significant difference this year is that in previous years to last year, we actually underspent by year end, so we were able to make contributions to our general reserves. And what happened last year was we actually used £16 million of reserves in 1 year. So we took our general reserve balance down from about 26 down to 10, which is our minimum level of working balances. So in short, this time last year, faced with an overspend of about £12 million, we knew we comfortably had reserves to fund that. We aren't in that place this year. So I think it's much more challenging this year, and I think that's why the action being taken in terms of, you know, the management action to reduce that overspend and the way that we're holding spend and holding vacancies and inviting industry experts in is unprecedented. An unprecedented level of activity to meet that slightly more significant issue, I think. You mentioned the sort of work done to deliver the 5 million reduction. Forgive me, I'm not sure if there was actually a question for officers there, so I'll probably just move on if that's okay. In terms of the safety valve, I don't know, Celia, would you like to start? And obviously, Mariah, can chip in if you need.
Yeah, thank you. So we are on track with the safety valve. The slight variation, we should have been 2 million in surplus at the end of this year. We are 650,000 shy of that. That is because of the increase in pupil population. So we forecast a 1% increase in pupil population over the whole of the plan. With the significant inward migration we've had in the last year, we've had a 1% increase in 1 year. We have forecast that, we've reprofiled, that's gone back to the DfE and they are happy with that. That will translate to more money coming in our DSG block next year because of the increased pupils. So everything on the plan in terms of that is on track. We are where we should be with that plan.
And in regards to that, this year's safety valve allocation is just over 2.1 million, and it's given to us in 3 tranches effectively when we submit our monitoring reports, and we've had 2/3 of this year's allocation received so far, as well as last year's allocation.
I can pick up the Eden House element. So where we are at the moment is we've got now, as of this week, got a full management team in place. So we've got a registered manager, we've got the 2 deputies, we've got the team leaders. We've had some challenges around the physical building. So this week I've learnt more about air source heat pumps than I would care to know. So we've had a few of those issues ongoing. This Friday we've got the National Children's Home Association are reviewing our documents as almost a pre-Ofsted, check and balance. Our aim is to put the submission into Ofsted early January with a view to hopefully getting that through and up and running before the the end of the financial year. So that's the current plan. Some of that is going to be down to Ofsted timeframes. I think, as I sort of mentioned in a previous meeting, Ofsted are quite short of numbers at the moment because they've got all of the supported accommodation providers that they need to also register at the moment. But we're hopeful that we can potentially get it on the fast track scheme. So we're still, touch wood, aiming to be up and running by the end of the financial year.
Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. It's a shame you started off with such a political point at this for this meeting, because actually I don't think that's particularly constructive. It would be much nicer to have heard the Labour group's ideas on where it's going with the budget rather than criticising the previous budget. I suppose you're waking up to the realisation that actually running a council is hard work and it's not that easy. Anyway, I think it's also worth noting just where we are in terms of national funding. I think we borrowed over £500 billion to pay for COVID, and it's going to take an awful long time for that money to be repaid. And with taxes where they are, there is not a lot of money out there. And I'll just iterate the point that Councillor Perfect made. You know, all of us on this side, wherever we have the opportunity to lobby, either the DFE, our MPs, you know, as chair of trustees for schools in Medway, I regularly lobby for more money for both SEND and also children's social services. We're not sitting back here doing nothing, and the Labour Party don't hold the moral high ground on that. I have a few general questions, and obviously as I'm only substituting, I apologise if any of these questions miss the point. I'm just wondering how much auditing of care packages goes on to make sure that where care packages are awarded, we're confident that the care that we're paying for is being delivered to the standard that we expect it to be delivered to. I was interested in the amount of money that we're spending mostly in capital to improve school buildings. A lot of that capital is going to schools that are parts of academy trusts. And I'm wondering, what's the negotiation between academy trusts who seem to have quite good balance sheets in the main against the money that we might be providing? I know a lot of that comes from central government grant. So for an example, Luton Primary School, which is just transferred to a trust, on page 44, we're spending £400,000 on a new nursery unit. Now, I'm sure that nursery unit's definitely needed, but it'd be interesting to know that relationship between the council and the trusts to make sure that trusts aren't just saying, well, we're not doing this, you've got to pay for it. I was also interested in the large amount of spend in SEND and how, especially in the capital side, and how we're linking giving that capital to schools against the outcomes that they achieve for pupils. So are we being rigorous in making sure that where we're giving large amounts of capital, that actually we're going to get the return on investment is outstanding attainment for those children who are going into those areas. And there was just a few underspends noted on page 54. The inclusions ones, I think, is the safety valve. Councillor Perfect tells me, about 708, almost 800,000. But there's also some underspends in school improvement. And I think given the disparity between schools in Medway, school improvement spend, I think, is absolutely needed. But there's also underspends in early years sufficiency of 148,000. Just a bit comment, what is that? And the education management team, I'm assuming that we're holding over a load of vacancies rather than looking to make changes to the leadership team. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so if I answer the bits I can, and then I'll pass over to James to talk about the auditing part. So if I take them, and forgive me if I miss any, so please remind me. So in terms of the capital programme, so our capital programme is kind of split into two. First of all, you have the condition programme of our maintained schools. So there are schools, and we have to go through and make sure the windows, the doors, etc. are kept up to scratch. But in terms of where we're actually building on academies, we have the statutory responsibility for place planning. So if we have to put in a bulge class, for example, into a school, we have to make sure that that academy trust still has the capacity in order to educate that class at that particular school. And certainly in terms of the safety valve programme, we're opening up resource units. They are at academy schools, and again, it's our statutory responsibility to make sure we can open those at those particular trusts. In terms of the nursery, I think that's at Luton, if I remember correctly. It was on our condition programme before they transferred to an academy, so we had to transfer and carry that particular part through when they became an academy. In terms of the underspend on school improvement, I can tell you on that one, that's a particular grant they actually got in. They weren't expecting it, so it's more income. It's also quite difficult when you're looking at the education, because some of the cost centres and codes are part funded by the DSG and some are not. So actually it's quite difficult to separate them out. But what I can tell you, for example, the early years sufficiency team isn't actually underspending, it's the payments to providers. So we had fewer nursery payments, which we are spending out less than we got on the grant. Therefore that money goes back to the grant. So it's just a case of where we're showing that, if that makes sense.
I can pick up the point about the kind of are people getting the care packages that that they're getting. The answer is in the main yes. So one of the big pieces of work that Leanne and Donna tasked us to do about 18 months ago was to do just that, do a root and branch review of all the care packages, all the placements we've got. So we reviewed all of the panels. So we ended up initially with 3 different panels. So an initial panel, a review panel, and a high cost placement panel. And in the last year, every single one of our residential placements has been reviewed at least twice. Our unregulated placements are reviewed every week, and our high-cost placements are reviewed every month. As a result of that, and due to the investment in that panels and processes element, I think it was about £2 million we saved as a result of reviewing all of those existing packages of care. And we do robustly go back to providers if we don't believe we're getting what we think we're getting. So whether that's around therapeutic packages, whether that's around staffing levels, the standards of the home. We've got nearly 50 embargo providers. So actually there's a lot of providers that we're actually physically going out to see that we're saying actually this isn't fit for our young people. So all of that is minuted. We've got fully written up processes. So I can provide you that absolutely with that assurance that, you know, we are getting what we're paying for.
In response to your jibber-jabbering at me, it is political. We are the 6th richest nation in the world. Your side, the cabinet, when we were inadequate, I know you didn't get elected in 2019, but I was on that painful journey where overviewing Scrutiny was the Churchill Dog Committee, nodding everything through. We went into inadequate, and 6 weeks later, we closed down Eden House, which was outstanding. And now we're trying to open it. So it is political, unfortunately, and we need more money. And it's not just Medway, who are now, fortunately, Labour and cooperative controlled, will make better decisions, look after our children, because children matter in Medway, and so do our employees and our constituents. Celia's turn.
Thank you. I was just going to come back to your point in terms of attainment. So obviously, where we're expanding schools in terms of place planning and this need for sufficiency, our schools are all inspected by Ofsted and under those and inspected under that regime. Where we commission places, so through our high needs block where we set up resource provisions, as James has articulated, they are all now under contract to us. There are SLAs, there are KPIs, absolutely focused on the outcomes for our children, it's particularly our most vulnerable young people, making sure that we do get that quality.
Now you can come back.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Celia. Just going back to the point about the discussions with Academy Trust, though, when we're looking for bulge classes, I don't think you quite dealt with the point around, are we negotiating with Academy Trust in terms of what part of funding comes from grant via us and what's coming out of their reserves? Because I suppose in the long term they do gain the improvement in assets, and also they get the revenue funding from from those children going through. I may have missed a general point on this, but it'd be quite important. And Chair, if I can just pick up one point, you said right at the start of the meeting about thinking about children we've had interaction with. Well, I was at a school that's part of the trust where I'm chair of trustees, and it's a school in one of the most deprived parts of Medway. And despite difficult budget and staffing issues, that school actually achieved national average for one of the first times at the last Key Stage 2 results. So I do bear those things in mind, and you know, the staff and parents of that school should be very proud of what was achieved in July. Thank you.
Celia, could you answer that?
Thank you. In terms of expansion negotiation with trusts, we obviously have to provide the capacity where it is needed. We have to get that in the appropriate school, the phase, etc. So there are a number of things that inform those conversations. Also, how much capital allocation we have, what capacity a school has on site. We absolutely have conversations about available capacity, making sure that where we are putting in that additional capital investment, that's not just for a one-off, but will give us capacity over a number of years, really making sure we get the best value for money, price per pupil on those builds.
Thank you, Celia. It's now Marion.
Thank you, Chair. I have a quick question. So yesterday we saw on the news that the government is changing the policy about the foreign migrants coming here to work by lifting the required salary to 38,000, also not allowing people working here from different countries to bring their family, and cutting the foreign worker salary discount, and also people from another country will have to pay now more than £1,000 a year to receive NHS treatment. Is that gonna put more pressure on Medway recruiting social care workers?
Thank you for the question. In terms of how we have recruited, in the past, Medway has gone and recruited internationally. Currently, we have no plans to do that immediately. We are always exploring that option, and obviously this is something new. You said yesterday we haven't had the opportunity to look at that to see how that will impact, but. Yeah, I mean, I can't answer that question specifically, but at the moment we don't have any intention of going down the international route at this point in time. We have in the past.
And Mark. Would everybody just check their microphone?
It's come on now, Chair.
Oh, yeah.
Shall I continue now? Chair? Yeah, many thanks. So, yeah, okay. A failed attempt to silence me, obviously. I just wanted to address Councillor Galvin's point because I can understand why the officer didn't wish to address this particular point, and I think that's quite right. it's in a sense a political point. What Councillor Galvin is trying to do, and he did the same thing at the Business Support Committee, is he's trying to say that the £5 million in the projected savings, in the projected overspend, the £5 million savings which have been made in that, are the work of officers, not the portfolio holders in the administration. But I can assure him, if he needs reassurance, that in this administration, the portfolio holders and the senior management team are working very closely to have achieved, or to achieve further savings, and to have achieved these savings so far. This is in contrast to a meeting of the Regeneration Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which I attended, Chair, where one of the Conservative members present described the then overspend, but then projected overspend of 17 million as a story. Well, it may have been a story to him because it was probably left for officers to look after that aspect. And there was a lack of oversight by the administration, and I could certainly give examples of that if I'm challenged. The way this administration works is that portfolio holders work very closely with the senior management team and have been hands-on in reducing that projected deficit. So I would like to put Councillor Galvin's mind at rest on that. I'm disappointed, incidentally, it's a minor point, but I'm disappointed that the Conservative group spokesperson described some of the questions and comments from this side of the chamber as being sarcastic. I thought that they were very good questions by Councillor Smither-Campbell and others who have spoken on our side, and I don't believe they were sarcastic questions at all. At one meeting we were criticised for not asking any specific questions on the budget because we'd had a fair airing elsewhere in the agenda on financial matters at that particular meeting. When we do ask questions, we're told we're being sarcastic. But it's a minor matter in the scale of things, Chair. Joe, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I've got a list. Can I just do it in this order, please? Lenny first, Liz, Sharon, Leah, and Satinder.
Hear me? You can hear me? Great. Okay, just about bulge classes. Celia mentioned about the school block next year, and in the reports it talks about bulge classes, but in addition to that, there's been an increase in number of pupils coming into the area, is leading to other bulge classes that are potentially being discussed with admissions at Medway. And I just want to ascertain, is the bulge classes you mentioned in the report, in the presentation, is that exclusively the deficit in the school block, safety valve difference, and that the new places that are needed this academic year are in addition to, therefore the figure will be different, or does it include all of the bulge classes that are needed?
Good question. I'm not sure if Celia or Maria answers that.
Sorry, I'll start at that. So if I understand your question, what you're saying is the difference in the safety valve of the 600,000, the additional pupils, 1%, are they the same that are causing the bulge class pressures at the moment in our primary? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just referring to the amount of, because I'm on Fair Access panel as well, so the amount of children that are coming through that, are they the same children, or is it?
Yes.
Is that an extra 240 children on top of that?
No, those are the children that have been accounted for in the safety valve plan, the extra ones, yeah.
Okay, so when a bulge class comes through, it's obviously because school funding is based on lagged funding. It's always based on the previous October's census. So when we know we need to open up a new class of, let's say, 30 in one particular year group, we approach schools, or they approach us, to say, actually, can you take additional funding? Now, the Schools Forum met in September, and especially around the new influx of unexpected pupils that were coming through, they agreed to fund 9 additional new classes from the school block DSG from January. So schools have been approached to say who could take a bulge class in order to resolve the 240-ish, I think Celia said, new pupils that have come through very unexpectedly that we weren't forecasting.
One point, sorry. So the school will get the money now for that, or they won't get it until the next academic year?
It depends if they open up a growth funding class that we have requested and they start taking them from January when we ask them to open. If they're taking them from 1 or 2 pupils, for example, then actually that funding rate rates to the next academic year, but it's really all around if they take a bulge class rather than the odd 1 or 2.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think we've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole this evening with sort of, attacking each other. I don't think it's a particularly good use of, this time, this forum, this of officer time. We need to be scrutinising. I appreciate we are, local politicians at the end of the day, and there will be some of that, but maybe some of those comments can be, say, for Twitter rather than sort of, our council meetings. I will add that we are definitely, as colleagues have said, up for lobbying government for more funds, but obviously national government have the same financial pressures as do local government, and we need to be ensuring that we're efficient with all the money that we have. So that sort of leads me on to sort of where we're going to make these savings and future proofing money with efficiency. I noticed that SEN transport is a huge cost. We've had some issues when we sort of went out for tendering this year. I mean, how do we see that process? Do we see that as a process that's working for us? Are we confident that we're being sort of efficient and using those processes as good as possible without sort of overspending where it's not necessary? Are we looking sort of outside of the box with regards to, I'm just thinking of sort of SEN schools and costs with not just transport, but also costs with caring for children and PA costs and things like that, which again is very expensive. Are we in dialogues with schools about whether there could be after-school clubs in those provisions? Mainstream schools can provide that sort of easier. But it is, obviously that would come at a cost, but it could be that there's cost savings with transport. If children are in school for longer, it might be that parents can do the transport. I'm just thinking of, this is, again, not necessarily the right place to sort of be coming up with ideas, but I just want to try and sort of put those kind of things out there. Are we looking at these sort of things where we can try and, spend more, but then maybe save much bigger sums in other areas? And Eden House was going to be another question that I was going to ask. So, yeah, thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So there is a working party looking at a range of options for transport. We're looking at 14 different options at the moment, and when that working party has looked through them, it will come back. The travel assistance policy will need to be reconsulted on and things like that. Parents and carers are included in those working groups as well. We haven't got after school clubs on that list, so I'll add it. Thank you for the suggestion.
Maria.
I was just going to say I had the same thought as well, so I'd already made a note, yeah.
Liz.
Oh, no, it's working. it was a stuttering a bit. So just moving forward and to try and make Medway Council more sustainable. I really loved your idea when I heard about it about social worker apprenticeship scheme. And because I feel like if we're going to get local people to join up to this scheme, then we're not trying to get people from outside to come in. They already, hopefully, are in love with Medway and want to stay here and make it a better pay. So my thing is, are we limited to them spaces, or are they being taken up? How they're being advertised? What's the response? Because you said you were advertising for outside for social workers to come in. Are we doing the same for the apprentice scheme?
Yes, we are. If you'd have seen on social media, we've increased our number of newly qualified social work intake, and those adverts are out there now, so we're hoping that we'll get a good intake of those. But I think our round of interviews for social work apprentices is happening currently, and Mariah might be able to help me with how many we're taking.
I think it's a range. So we have apprenticeships, we have newly qualified, we have social workers in their first year of employment. So we could take as many as our staffing could handle effectively. But actually, I want to say overall there will be 4 apprentices, but 4 this year, 4 next year, and 4 from last year.
Yes.
So overall, we'll have about 12.
That's good. That's my comment. No, I just feel that that's a good way, and 12 is a brilliant number to start off with. Thank you.
And we've restructured our family solutions 3 years ago, and we've included a career pathway there for our practitioners that are coming into early help, and a number of them are applying for the social work apprentices, a number of them have qualified as our newly qualified social workers, so it's an attractive offer to our staff.
Okay. Leah.
I think I turned that on properly. So the first one was about the Medway Care Agency, I know that was for health, but I wondered if we spoke about, or if we looked at whether we can use that to recruit social workers. That works. And whether we had now completed checking all the schools for RAC. I know Holcombe was found to have RAC, and where I didn't see it in there, whether that would impact on any of the budget things. And there's a few others that have already been covered, but I also wanted to say, it's handy that Councillor Perfect has just come back in, because I wanted to say, the Chancellor has took challenging decisions, but it's true to form that the most vulnerable are going to shoulder that whole burden. So it's all well and good to say there are challenging decisions to be made, but they've made it and they've placed it here by not fixing this funding crisis. They've left the most vulnerable to shoulder all of that burden. So that's that.
RAC.
So there are no additional pressures to the school's budget for RAC.
The question about social workers, I think you may be thinking of the initiative around adults. And yes, for adult social workers, you're absolutely correct. There will be opportunities there. However, that's different to children. But yeah, there will be for adults.
And Satinder then. Oliver, sorry.
Me. Thank you, Chair. Councillor Turpin covered most of what I was going to say. The second bit, not the first bit. I actually forgot national government needed to produce a balanced budget year on year. So thanks for the reminder there. I will say why I do have the platform and acknowledge the fact that unaccompanied asylum seekers children are on there, and it's really, a really nice thing to see, given what kind of conditions they leave and what makes them unaccompanied, and the kind of wing that we've kind of shadowed them under now. A complete contrast, I believe, from what happened in February with our judicial review, and it's really amazing to see this administration and this new council taking a compassionate approach, as it should always.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hello. I'm not sure if I'm right in saying this, so do correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a website called schoolcuts.org.uk, and they're saying that 87 of 94 schools in Medway are going to face cuts in 2024-25, and that's roughly around 8.5 million. I don't know if that comes into what you guys are doing, but I just wanted some clarity on that, if that's okay.
Probably the simplest answer is that whilst pound for pound funding is going up, it's going up less than the costs that they will be seeing, right? So they will not be seeing a cut in grant, but their staffing costs are likely to be going up at a rate that the government agree, and their energy costs are going up far faster than anyone can afford. And so what the cut that is referred to in any article that's talking about like that is a real terms cut, with the difference between increased funding and increased need. So it's, just to be absolutely clear, not a cut in funding, but it just means that each pound is going less far for those schools.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Can I just say, if you haven't seen the marketing done to attract social workers to Medway, I've seen it and it's outstanding, and maybe we could show it to the Youth Council, and maybe they could put some suggestions in and maybe do their own one for us. I'm just thinking of engaging our young people more, but I thought it was really fantastic at selling us. And of course, we've been on such a journey and we've got a tremendous team, and, you know, it's important that we value them and respect them. But, you know, I'm so eager to have children's voices here, or not children, young people and children. So, you know, that would be a nice, vibrant talking point. Has anyone else seen it? Yeah, good. So, we're ahead of schedule if there's no more comments on the budget. Wow, that's a first for us. That's good, because it's freezing in here. Okay, so Leah, you've got a novel.
I was going to say, this might take us way over schedule now, but we note the Cabinet that has instructed officers to continue to work with portfolio holders in formulating robust proposals to balance the budget for 24-25. We note that Cabinet agreed to recommend to full Council that in February 2024, when setting the council tax, the following changes are applied to council tax premia in line with the rating, Property and Common Occupation and Council Tax Empty Dwellings Act 2018, as set out in paragraph 9.18 of this report. The 100% premium for long-term empty properties may be brought forward so that it can commence after being empty for 1 year rather than 2, with effect from the 1st of April 24, and 100% premium may be charged for properties that are unoccupied but furnished, known as second homes, with effect from the 1st of April 2025. And we note that the Cabinet agreed to recommend to full Council that in February 2024, when setting the council tax, the following changes are applied to the council tax discretionary discounts as set out in 17 agenda item 5A, paragraph 9.18 of this report. Reduce the discount in respect of Class C to 0% from the day on which a property becomes vacant, and to reduce the discount in respect of Class D to 0%. That was all draft budget monitoring. Do I move these separately?
No, at the end.
Okay, so capital budgeting monitoring, I move that we note the results of the second round of capital budget monitoring for 23-24 and the management actions to resolve the projected overspend in children and adults. The Children and Young People Overview and Scrutiny Committee is asked to note the changes made to the capital programme as set out in 8.1 to 8.2 to this report. Revenue budget monitoring, I move that we note the results of the second round of revenue budget monitoring for 23-24, and we note that the Cabinet has instructed the corporate managing team to implement urgent actions to bring expenditure back within the budget agreed by full Council.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And also, can we add the point that Liz made about the after-school provision for SEN, which we all took on board? So, can I have a seconder? Thank you, Smither. Thank you. That's agreed. Thank you so much. I know you've been working night and day and you're doing a good job with the Cabinet, and I know if there's money to be saved and if we can ring fence it for our children and vulnerable families, you will be doing that. So have a nice rest of evening. Thank you. I love this bit. It's our friend Sandy, and looking at your report, it's good news. Thank you.
I won't go through the report. I mean, all reports talk about it because I think it explains itself. Can you hear me?
Can you move it down a little bit?
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I think the report is self-explanatory, and I think we can go straight into questions.
Straight to questions. Anybody? Okay. Smith and then Adrian.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. I am looking on page 67. There's quite a few complaints. Well, I mean, overall, I just want to say it's a good picture. You know, I think complaints are resolved quickly, they're resolved satisfactorily. So, well done to the team on all the efforts and in dealing with the complaints that come and finding suitable solutions. On page 67, there's, I think the highest number of complaints are to do with behavior of staff or level of service provided. That seems like a people problem. That seems like that could be addressed with training. I'm just concerned because when people come in contact with children's services, they're probably at their most vulnerable. And it is so important to get that right. I understand the pressures the staff are working under, but it's still not great if we're not being completely empathetic and helpful towards people. So I just wonder how that's being addressed. Thank you.
I think we'll always have complaints about social workers' behaviour in the sense that many families are very, not keen to have a social worker visit. Sometimes we make difficult decisions. When those sorts of complaints come in, the important thing is to look at, in supervision, in social work, we have to reflect on what we're doing in the work we do. Most times, perhaps it's just the way the person worded it. Sometimes it can be some cultural differences. And some people find some social workers much more direct. So they are, but it's about with social worker and the supervisor looking at how they could have rephrased it or said something differently. Sometimes they can't be solved because the family, we try our best to form good relationships and get families to trust. But sometimes they don't, and it lands up in court, and then it can become quite acrimonious. Some private proceedings, they think the one parent's, the social worker's biased to the other. All the social worker's doing is answering what the judge asked, where would these children best be placed with dad and mum. So I think it is addressed. It's dropped a lot in terms of previous years, but I think we'll always have some of those complaints, and we'll always look at our behaviour. Does that answer that question?
Can I answer? Yes, I just was wondering if the complaints process feeds back into training of social workers and if that's shared with the team as to this is what happened in this case and it could have been dealt with better if it was handled in this way.
Yes, there are training, there's workshops. There's been a series of compulsory attendance for managers, and we recommend that that's not only done in supervision, but to look at how I think the biggest theme is communication, because we assume people know about our services or about how, even just how an assessment will be handled. So that's a big theme, and it's in all my reports, and I do go on about it all the time. So yes, I could say it is fed back, it is taken very seriously. And I think social workers, I have social workers in meetings with the complainant, and they allow some sort of resolution between them, and they come to an agreement, yeah, I could have said that differently. So yes, I think we do that quite well.
Anybody else?
Well, thank you, Joe. And thank you, Sandy, for a brilliant report. Just probably more of a question for Leanne, I'd imagine, because Donna isn't here. Just around the learning, I mean, one of the, on page 74, we talk about the main theme being the complaints in poor communication. I just wonder how we link this, the outcomes of some of these complaints, and particularly these key learnings, and in this case, obviously poor communication, in with the CPD that we arrange for staff, and just how that sort of links together in informing sort of the next academic year, and you know the sort of process that sits around that in terms of training for staff. And I just think it's, you know, it's positive, a really positive report to see, you know, that really the only challenge really is around communication as the sort of main theme. So that's good. Thank you.
I'll pick that up. I think we work very closely with Sandy and her team. We pride ourselves, I think, on learning from the complaints. As Sandy shared, workers, team managers, service managers will spend time with Sandy and the complainant to really understand what's happened, what we could do better. And we take back the learning into our service meetings, to team meetings, to ensure that we do the best that we can for children and families in Medways. We know we don't always get it right, but we understand that complaining is important to ensure us that we improve our service that we give to children and families. So I think the learning is taken away from each and every complaint that we receive.
Liz.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, and thanks very much for this report. It looks really positive. I wanted to just sort of check is whether, you know, do families have to sort of say the magic word of complaint for it to be logged here? If they're sort of feeding back and they're unhappy, but they're not actually saying they're wanting to make an official complaint, is that, is it being logged as an actual complaint, or is it being logged in a different way but still being used?
A formal complaint is labelled a formal complaint. They can make that to anyone, anywhere in the organisation who will refer that. Thanks, sorry, I don't get so much feedback now. They will refer that to us to log as a complaint. And I'm sure Kelly could point out what they do with that, what we would call resolving a complaint before it becomes a complaint.
So we will take that as a concern and we'll have those conversations at that level and try and resolve that issue for that family at that point. But obviously if families aren't happy, then obviously that's when it moves on to a complaint. But we try and manage it at the earliest stage as possible. Team managers, social workers, I will make telephone calls to families and try and understand what the issue is and resolve it as early as we can. But obviously some do then go on to complaints.
Sorry, if I can just briefly come back there. So are those sort of more unofficial concerns, are they being logged so that there's learning from that? Because I guess there could be, those sort of things could be a very different picture to what we're seeing here, and just sort of, there could be a very different pattern, and just making sure that the learning is going on from that as well.
I can assure you they're logged and the concerns come from Sandy and her team. They come through the same way as complaints do, and once we've responded and we feel that it's dealt with, we let Sandy and her team know, and then that's logged as well.
Thank you. Is it any different, or is it pretty much what we're seeing here? Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Chair, can I just say something? Complaints are very important to me. So, you know, if it looks like a complaint, if it sounds like a complaint, if it comes across my desk, it's a complaint. And I will ask for it to be treated like that, and Michelle and Sandy are brilliant at doing that. Sometimes the criticism has been, leave it at me, that we might have some over-reporting because of that strict line that I'm taking. But it is really, really important that the people of Medway have the opportunity to complain if there is something wrong, because otherwise I won't know how to fix it. So we've taken that sort of attitude, and I think, you know, this report, I was pleased with this report because it absolutely showed the transparency, it showed that we were responding within timescales. All of those things I know are difficult, and if I see that a complaint is running to the last day, I will approach that manager myself and ask for it to be dealt with that day. We take it really, really seriously, and I think that's why it's reflected in this report. Some good things. We always have something to learn, but my major principle is that anybody in Medway needs the right to complain, and they must know how to complain, and we must respect that complaint. So I hope that's assured you, Councillor Turpin.
Wayne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Leanne, first of all, those comments you just made with regards to complaints, very well received. So thank you for that. And also the actual report itself is very positive as well. So the team is doing a very admirable job, and may that continue. One of the things that I noted within the report, and it rises essentially from more diagnosis of ADHD and autism amongst young people nowadays. But on page 75, it does say about one of the issues of complaints that's been raised is that social workers weren't fully aware and abreast of the multiple facets that arise through these diagnoses of ADHD and autism, and how is that being tackled? And my question is, whilst you're doing that training, how quick will that be delivered, and how quickly can that impact on these young people's lives?
Are you referring to 14.10, Wayne?
Yes, Madam Chair.
To me, you know, a former head teacher, complaints are a barometer for development. This is obviously one person's complaint. You know, in terms of step up to social work or training our apprentices on the job, there are really good opportunities for training. But obviously that spectrum, that train track of different ability is very, you know, different traits, it's broad, it's wide, it's, you know, so not every key indicator would be there, is my opinion on that.
Thank you. I think this was in respect of a specific case, but I think we spoken before at overview and scrutiny about the recruitment issues within our children and young people with disabilities team, and how we're really building on their knowledge and skills, and working on a multi-agency partnership, working with our colleagues in education, with those moving into our children and families hubs. So we're building on our experience and knowledge and training for staff all the time.
So, Mayor, the point really is, though, that obviously it's ADHD and autism comes under various spectrums. It's not just a one-size-fits-all. And I'm just wondering to how much training will those social workers be getting in order to, or will specific cases relating to a particular type and aspect of autism, for example, be picked up and allocated to a particular social worker in the future?
Okay. The hope would be that it could. So if you've got a specialist social worker in a team, they could be allocated that family and child to work with. I think we are working hard to ensure that training is there for social workers, but given the number of complexities with autism and ADHD, I think the key is to working with our partners and seeking that support from education, from health colleagues, to ensure that we're meeting the family's needs.
Can I just also make a point there? I don't think, we do have courses for awareness of autism and other disabilities. But as you say, each child, it's unique, and each child is unique. So what some social workers have demonstrated, I've seen that in an IRO who didn't understand a particular person's disability. She went and read it up, and she learned a great deal about it, and we got a compliment because that person said, that's the first person who's gone and actually learned. So that's a sort of learning environment. We don't know everything, but it's that curiosity to go and make sure that, you know, there might not even be a course. I don't think there is a course on this particular disability. I had to look it up as well. So I think it's that what you can encourage, a general awareness, and when you go and delve into it, find out from other professionals, go and read about it yourself. Find out from the parents. They're the best educators.
Andrew first.
Thank you. Just a couple of points of clarification. I know in the report, and by the way, I was really not seeing this report before, that the fact there's only been 46 complaints really surprised me, given the nature of the work that you're involved in and the stress of, you know, for social workers dealing with this type of work. But the 2 points of clarification, I noticed that there were 64 complaints that were rejected, but they're not part of the overall complaint. So do we do an assessment on the nature of the communication before we treat it as a complaint and report it as a complaint? And then on page 64, just a clarification on the table, it says 46 complaints received, 1 from the previous year, 32 dealt with within 10 days and 42 dealt with within 20 days, which would suggest more complaints than received. And maybe I'm just misinterpreting the numbers. Thank you.
I'll answer that one. The legislation says we should do our best to answer complaint in 10 days. However, if we cannot do that, we send a holding letter to say we can't do that. We have to answer in the timescale in 20 working days. So that works out to be 4 weeks. It's the same complaint. Some come in 10 days. So if you look at how the way they count it up, some would have been answered in 10 days, some would have been answered in 11 to 20 days. You add them up, that's how many were answered in the final statutory timescale. So, does that make sense? Can I explain it any better?
I think it makes sense. I mean, the fact you've got no open complaints at the end of the reporting period says you're doing a great job. I don't think I quite understand that response. For me, if you've got 46 complaints, hopefully 30 are dealt with within 10 days and 16 were dealt with within 20 days from opening to close. But I don't want to take up too much more time with the committee on.
The other issue is the complaint could come in on the 31st of a month, so it goes over to the next month's responses. That's why they don't always add up. You won't always get all 46 answered here, and this year only 1 carried over last year. But sometimes they carry over, so that's why that doesn't add up.
Okay.
You had another, sorry, I completely slipped what the other question was.
Vicky, next. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a question about on page 65 on the stage 1 complaints received. There's significantly higher complaints in the adolescent team and the disability team, which some people have picked up on as well. I wondered how that impacted the support for those team members in terms of their professional development, if they are the teams that are receiving the most complaints, and also if it impacts on the spread of experience, because I know you've talked a lot about holding a lot of social workers in training and how you enable them to develop their path into the profession, and whether that is evenly spread amongst teams where maybe there is less of that pressure that comes from those teams that are receiving the most complaints.
Okay, so I think what we've also previously talked about is the staffing struggles that we've had within our adolescent team and the disability teams 0 to 25. So I think that's recognised here in the number of complaints we've had in respect of those teams. And what we know is that we've taken forward our adolescent team so that we're going to be managing those young people differently, and there's been changes within the 0 to 25 team, so we've now got the children with disability team. We've got permanent recruitment within that team as well. So I think the complaints recognise where we knew we had the issues within the services.
Anyone else? Can I indulge myself? Is that all right? Page 71, our looked after children are now called our children in care. I wondered what we're doing to address, and I just get fed up with this. You know, I met a care leaver the other day and she said I had to tell my story 8 times. These questions, how are we addressing children not being on, having to relive that trauma, that pained experience again and again, really?
That's in our strive to improve our recruitment process within our children and care leaving teams, so that children aren't having to need to tell their stories time and time again because there's a change of social worker.
Thank you. And it's so lovely, 12.1, you know, when you look at the data, you know, it's now at 5 and we're down to, you know, it started at 12 in 2017. So well done for this robust and comprehensive report. And as I said, I always get excited to see you, Sandy. I remember when you used to be a review officer didn't you, Medway? Yeah. Thank you. She's free. You're free to go. Oh, hang on, we've got to do, sorry. I'm really apologising here. One moment, Sandy, just in case there's any actions. Leah, sorry.
I move that we note the Complaints and Compliments Annual Report 22 to 23.
Is that seconded? Is that? Thank you, Marion. Thank you again. That brings us to item 7, Medway Safeguarding Partnership, or MSCP. And we have that on page 81 to 116.
Thank you, Chair. And if I can just say a few words of introduction for the report. So working together to safeguard children is the statutory, government statutory guidance around safeguarding children. And one of the things that's set out in that statutory guidance is that safeguarding partnerships should publish an annual report. So this report is the 4th annual report of the Medway Safeguarding Children Partnership, which covers the period from April 2022 to up to March 2023. And it was presented a couple of weeks ago to the Health and Wellbeing Board, and it is due to be presented to the Community Safety Partnership as well. So the report effectively provides an overview of the work carried out by the MSCP within the last year. It sets out the key achievements of the partnership against each of the 6 priorities that have been set, and it gives an overview of the learning and improvement role of the MSCP, in particular around the case reviews that are undertaken. The report also includes a section from the independent scrutineer, who is Rory Patterson, and I will just add that Rory sends his apologies today because he couldn't be with us. So that's really it that I just wanted to say by introduction. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Adrian, then George, sorry.
Right, thank you, Joan. Thanks, Simon, for introducing the report, because it's a very, very important one. I've just got a few comments to make. It's very important in these issues to have continuity, and I was pleased to see that both Rory Patterson and John Drew's contacts have been extended. I think that's important. And it was interesting to note in the report also this comment about in the rapid changes in both the police and the ICB representatives on the partnership. And I think this is something that I've noticed over a number of years now, that the police certainly seem to have a revolving door locally, and albeit that this one was at Assistant Chief Constable level, but there does seem to be a huge churn amongst senior police officers, and I think that's to the detriment of policing here in Medway, because no sooner have they got to know the area, know our needs, and start to deal with them, they seem to move on, and that goes all well. And when you complain to the Chief Constable and the Police and Crime Commissioner, which I have done in the past, that they say, well, it's all down to operational needs, which doesn't really give one an answer. And it's almost getting the same now with the ICB and its previous incarnations. I've noticed that Health and Wellbeing Board, the amount of change in representatives there, but at least we've got some continuity now. In this section where it says links to other partnerships, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, Simon, but there's talk about can we have better links with the Community Safety Partnership. As an ex-chair of the Community Safety Partnership, that's something I'm still on it. I would be keen to know how we can do this better, because the CSP does have this report for discussion every year, and particularly the two things that I mentioned, child trafficking and county lines, are very important to the CSP. And I just wondered how we could improve that partnership working, because unfortunately the CSP has a huge agenda each time it meets, to about 3 to 4 hour meetings. So how we can work on that and make it better. If you've got any ideas, Simon, but if not, perhaps pass it on. And there's a big concern on page 12 of the report, 96 of our agenda, and the conclusions. It says, the partnership has also not been able to deliver on its ambition to hear the views of children and families and ensure that they shape the future direction of strategy direction. That's very concerning, given that how important the voice of the child is. So, well, it should be to all of us. So, how that's happened, I would like to know. There's mention there also of Cookham Wood. There certainly have been major problems there. I was a bit taken aback during the election campaign to come across a lady who worked there, who gave me a long litany of things that were terribly wrong. But when I suggested she needed to make those complaints formally, and I couldn't take them forward anonymously, refused point blank for her name to go forward, because she was so fearful of the repercussions. Now that was quite a frightening experience, I've got to say. And also in the past, this is probably ancient history, but we had quite a strong link between Cookham Wood and our yacht team. In fact, the yacht team used to have part of it embedded on the secure estate at Cookham Wood. And if my memory serves me correctly, that was sort of terminated because one governor, when it changed, the governor at Cookham Wood changed that, didn't want that to happen. And I just wondered if there would be any benefits in bringing this back and bring that back and having that closer relationship between the youth offending team and through that the council. On page 23, there's referrals made by KMPT jumping from 17 in quarter 3 to 169 in quarter 4. There's some explanation in there as to why that took place, but that is a huge jump. And has it been that KMPT have been dramatically underreporting and then had their knuckles rapped and suddenly they've thrown the kitchen sink at it all? I would like to know. And just finally, the awkward issue of budgets. I noticed that the partnership is very good at keeping within its budget allocations,
but I can't help but noticing there's yet again been a reasonably substantial contribution to reserves. I believe this was done in the previous year. Given the severe pressures on the constituent authorities that fund the partnership, I'd be a little bit concerned if the partnership was building up too adequate reserves at the expense of the constituent partnership, of which the Medway Council's one of the biggest funders. Those are my bits and pieces, Simon. If you can make sense of that, it'd be absolutely great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and I'll try my best to respond to those points. And I certainly take your first point, your starting point, in terms of the importance of the continuity of those kind of relationships around the partnership, and you know, kind of some of that impact that changes within the police have had. I would say now that actually the representation on the executive has been constant for, you know, kind of the last sort of 9 months. And it's actually at a more senior level now, because actually we've got representation at that assistant chief constable level. One of the other things that we've introduced within the year are some what we call accountable officer forums. So twice a year, the Chief Executive of Medway Council, Chief Constable of Kent Police, and the Chief Executive of the ICB meet in terms of to review the annual report, but also have a kind of an opportunity to set the kind of strategic direction of the partnership. So there's that opportunity, if there are any concerns around that representation, there is that opportunity there to raise those issues. I think you touched on the links with the Community Safety Partnership. As I said, this report is going to the Community Safety Partnership, as you'll know from previously. We have had some discussions within the MSCP executive, and it's something that came up in an external review that we had undertaken about looking at the joint working protocol that we've got in place between the Safeguarding Children Partnership, Community Safety Partnership, Health and Wellbeing Board, and the Adult Safeguarding Board. So I am starting to do some work, and the executive will be looking at that early next year, around how we can operationalise that a bit more. So it's got in the joint working protocol about the annual reports and strategic plans going to each of the partnerships twice a year. But actually one of the things that we're looking at is it possible to get the chairs of those partnerships together once a year to have an actual discussion about the priorities and making the links between the priorities of the different boards. For example, we've got domestic abuse as a priority, and how that kind of sits across the Community Safety Partnership as well. So you mentioned about the, in fact, it's the independent scrutineer's comment around the engagement of children and families as a bit of a concern. So I will just add, it's not that we haven't heard or listened to the voices of children and families, because, you know, that is really important. One of the things that we wanted to do towards the end of last year, and we're going to be doing this year, is around developing a communication strategy and identifying more ways to hear the voices of children and family, including linking in with the, you know, kind of child-friendly Medway and what engagement other agencies are doing. I think the other points that you touched on, I think one was about Cookenwood and the link with the yacht. I don't know, Leanne, if you want to respond to that.
Yes, I can respond to that. You'll know that Cookenwood had an inadequate inspection. I meet regularly with the lead for improvement for Cookenwood from the Justice Department, Dr. Baldwin. She and I meet basically because Medway has responsibilities as we are the host local authority. So Cookenwood is within our geographical bounds. that does not mean that Cookham Wood has large numbers of Medway's children residing in Cookham Wood. It doesn't mean that at all. We have other responsibilities like providing a LADO service, etc., etc. So we are very much supporting Cookham Wood in terms of the Justice Department's overview and how they are driving that change. So from that point of view, yes, our youth offending team, the service manager there is by my side usually in terms of those meetings, but I am very clear that we need to maintain our proper boundaries, Councillor. It would be very easy for Medway to step right into that space, and we do as much as we can, but our resource is for Medway's children first and foremost. And the service manager of Yacht will obviously hold out a hand to Cookham in terms of children that are in Cookham Wood that belong to Medway. So I hope that reassures you, but certainly the strategic overview of that improvement, I am involved.
You happy with that? Okay, I've got George next.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Simon, for the report. It follows on a little bit actually from the point Councillor Golvin was making about on page 96 of the agenda pack, but page 12 of your report. But I picked out certainly this bit here being made by Rory about identifying the impact and outcomes of its work. The partnership recognises it needs to do that, and setting and delivering against its priorities. I just wondered how that's currently being monitored and reviewed, if there's sort of an improvement plan that's produced on an annual basis, or how the priorities are set and then how they're assessed at the end of the accounting year. So I think it'd be useful just certainly for members to understand that. And then just moving forward, if you do that, is there any way to actually maybe bring some of that work into this report so that it can then be sort of reflected through the committee? Because I know obviously we've got these priorities that you're setting, but obviously the comment from the independent scrutineer is that they aren't sort of really identifying the sort of impact and outcomes of the work, and are more sort of focused, I would say, on sort of strategic aims of the organisation as a whole. So I'd be interested in your views on that. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the priorities that we've got, the current 6 priorities, so they were initially set 3 years ago, and then they're reviewed on a regular basis, but they are reviewed on an annual basis. So the priorities were set through a kind of series of multi-agency workshops, engagement with partners and things like that, and then set by the executive. We have underneath each of those priorities, we have a business plan which sets out all of the activity that is undertaken throughout the year to kind of drive forward those priorities. I know we have in the past shared that business plan. It's a publishable document, shared it with this committee, so certainly be happy to do that. As part of that action plan, we have a section in it which is around the updates and the outcomes and the impact. So that's how we kind of measure currently measure the outcome and impact of the work that we're doing set against each of the priorities. And that's reviewed on a regular basis by the MSCP executive. But I think the comments that you're alluding to in terms of the independent scrutineer's comment, and I think it's not just something for Medway, it's something that across the country, all other safeguarding children partnerships are looking to develop, is really kind of work on evidencing what the impact is of the work that we're undertaking.
Thank you. I think that's really useful. I think I'll just make the comment. I think it's always important to have sort of KPIs and achievables against some of this stuff, because I think certainly the points Rory's making, particularly against some of these priorities, is obviously they're very broad. And obviously the challenge is sometimes looking at the outcomes and ensuring that the outcomes tie back to the overall principles and objectives of the organisation. But thank you, Simon.
Thank you. Leo?
So I had some questions around Cook and Wood, but I think I'm going to save most of them because I know they're coming soon. The only one was the bit about placements and things and the fact that the other centre's opening. Are they, if there is a young offender who is from Medway, is he more likely, or he in this, more likely to be placed here? Is there kind of some national guidance on that? So there's nothing that says they should be placed near their families. That was that one. And then the other one was, I'm not sure if it was done through the Safeguarding Partnership, but I thought the event that was on Gillingham High Street around violence against women and girls, I just want to say I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was really good. That people were coming past and realising that things like catcalling and so on are reportable offences. They're not just kind of things you just put up with in the life of being a woman or a girl. It is a reportable offence and something will happen about it. So I thought it was really great that we got that message across. And then I also wondered who was likely to receive the guide. It says there's a guide been made about harmful sexual behaviour, but I wasn't sure who that's actually going to. And then the last one was, I think this is probably to Kelly, and it was whether or not we're better on... I've lost it, sorry. Oh, the full child and family assessment information, so where it says that families will be in step down without that happening, whether we're now, because that's from September 22, so I wonder whether there have been improvements on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall I just respond to I think your question around the harmful sexual behaviour guidance and where that's going to. So that guidance is specifically for practitioners. And we've done, so we've developed the guidance and we've launched that guidance. It goes out to, so it's gone out through our subgroups and links with the partner agencies that we've got. And the idea is that that's then disseminated out to those kind of frontline practitioners. It's also published on our website.
What page is your point on, please? 102. What do you do in front of them? Okay, so that's about children and families that have stepped down following that child and family assessment being completed, and that the assessment was found not to have the full information. And I think if you think back to that times and the caseloads within the services, within the assessment service, caseloads were higher. So I think what the findings from here was that the assessments weren't as good enough quality as what we needed to them to be, didn't have sufficient information in there to make that decision as to whether it was right at that time to step down to early help.
So the caseloads are lesser now and we are in a better place now than we were.
We're managing it differently now to what we were there. Caseloads are lower and we want them to be lower than they are, and we're working towards that, but the quality of the assessments are better now.
We've got Mark, then Vicky.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Joe. I've started getting the voice now. In terms of this independent safeguarding report, I'm sure Elizabeth and others on the committee will be delighted to hear this is something that we can reach across the political divide on, and I agree broadly with the questions that George and Adrian have asked. I just wondered, excuse me, I just wondered in the context of the independent safeguarding report, priorities 2 and 3 on contextual safeguarding and domestic abuse were extremely interesting reading and issues which we should certainly focus upon. I wondered if members had any further role here. I note that at the end of the passage on contextual safeguarding, under that heading, it says the findings of the report on child exploitation will be taken forward during 2023-2024. Does the director believe that there's any further useful input that we could make as councillors on this scrutiny committee? Because I very often read that interagency conferences have been held, very often involving services which are covered by this committee, such as youth service and youth offending team and other partners. And I wonder whether there's any mileage in drilling down a bit further, rather than this sort of searching for findings going on in a silo somewhere, and whether there's more member involvement that could be had, if you understand my question, Chair, in terms of taking forward the broad strategic discussions on child exploitation.
Thank you. If I can just respond to that, I'd be happy to kind of go away and think about how we could involve members more in the work of the Safeguarding Children Partnership. And one of the things, just as you were talking, that actually struck me was thinking about one of the sort of key areas of work of the partnership is around sort of multi-agency training with practitioners, with volunteers, and also some of the networking and kind of conference events that we put on, and we also produce kind of bulletins, information sheets and things like that. And actually whether, I'm not sure whether we send that to councillors and whether all councillors get that, and actually whether that might be something that councillors would be interested in receiving.
I'll reflect on that.
Thank you. I don't get that, but it would be useful.
Primary and secondary head teachers, but special school head teachers aren't mentioned. And also when you talk in the last page about relevant agencies, again, special schools aren't mentioned. I didn't know if this was because you felt there was effective representation through the primary and secondary schools, and they did represent special schools, or if it is an oversight.
Thank you, and particularly on your first point in terms of the work that we've done on the kind of website and promotion of the work that we do. Just picking up the point around schools engagement. So you're right that on our executive we have a primary head teacher and a secondary head teacher representative from the two forums. I'm happy to take back, and Celia, I don't know, you may have a view whether we need to consider actually special school representation. I would hope that through the current representation that we've got, we get that. But
yeah, thank you. So we've got obviously Mella and MSHA, but we take that back and ask for a sale rep as well.
Thank you. Sandra. Not Sandra, Sharon.
It's okay, I've answered to worse in my time, don't worry, that's fine. This might be way out there and not meant to be in here, but I was just reading through it, and there's like the links with suicide on page 109, talking about the relationship with ADHD and autism, but nowhere on there is there like looking into safeguarding against hate crime for the LGBT youngsters, because I know that the safeguarding against youngsters who are trying to find a safe space is getting harder, and I know suicide or attempts of suicides are on the rise, especially with the trans. So I was just, it might not be, but to me it's safeguarding, and if you're looking into links with suicide to that, then maybe the LGBT community should be looked into as well.
Yes, certainly I'm happy to take that back. The MSCP specifically is not doing any work currently around that, but I'm certainly happy to take that back. In terms of the bit that you mentioned around kind of suicide, that came out of learning from one particular case review. So where we have to undertake reviews on cases where there have been serious incidents, if there's any learning to be identified, then we take that forward. So that's where that specific kind of work stream came from. Otherwise, the work is mainly underneath the sort of 6 priorities. But I'm, certainly happy to take that point back. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz.
Thank you, Chair. I sat here long and hard about whether to mention this because it's a very emotive subject for myself, but I'm looking at the figures for child deaths in Medway, and unfortunately my son is one of those figures in there, and it sort of concerns me that he's actually identified as in much as he was only one child that died in a hospice in that year. Now, I'm always banging the drum for Demelza and the wonderful work that they do, and I noticed that 17 children died in hospital. Now, that may be, there was no way around that, but I'm just wondering where we look into, there's a process of looking, researching into child deaths. I'm not aware of that necessarily being reported back to families. I haven't had that process done. So I'm just wondering where we can look at this and making sure that young people are in the right setting where it's appropriate, and just ensuring that if a hospice is what a young person or the family want, that they have that ability to use it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for raising that. And I was just going to say the child death review process is led through the child death overview panel. So it sits, whilst the MSCP has oversight of that process, it sits separately within public health and the ICB. So I can certainly take those points back.
Can I just, as someone who has sat on a child death overview panel, it very much depends, but I can assure you to a certain extent that where a child dies and the nature of that death is absolutely looked at as part of the process. As you can imagine, it's quite, there's tight guidelines about how that is done. So there may be some learning coming from that, and certainly if there is a theme picked up around that issue, then it will be reported back through agencies, through to the MSCP to look at. But there's a delicate balance, obviously, between a family's right to privacy and what can go public.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I was just, I guess, a bit, I don't know what the right words to use are necessarily, but sort of surprised, I guess, that there was only one child that died in a hospice. And I know hospices can be used for other services as well, and sometimes a family come in after the child has passed and use the services in a bereavement suite then. But it's just, I just want to sort of have reassurance really that families are being signposted to those services if it's appropriate and timely. Thank you.
I think that's a really good point. And can I thank you for your dignity, you and Rupert, and also your courage, because, you worked intensively throughout that process. And I think you've raised a really valid point, because Demelza works really hard, doesn't it? And it is a really good setting to support every part of the family. Wayne.
So just a very general comment. Yesterday within Medway there was a young person who tragically passed away, and the school contacted certain parents and everything else with arrangements for bereavement counselling and also the services that Medway are providing through the social services. And I just want to acknowledge publicly the work that you all do in such shocking and very tragic circumstances. So I just wanted that noted, if that's okay.
That's lovely, Wayne, thank you. I've certainly been to Vicky's school and I know there's a lot of wraparound care there, and Dr Jo Winter and the psychology department in Medway do a lot of work supporting schools at times of crisis and especially bereavement, and not just teaching staff, TAs, all members of staff, you know, even kitchen staff, anybody that's affected, and children and siblings. So they really do a fantastic job. Thank you.
Is that as in the Vice Chair's thing? Because I didn't indicate.
Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. So I move that we note the Medway Safeguarding Partnership Annual Report for 22-23 and for Simon to investigate whether councillors can receive the briefings and information reports.
Yes, and to add, consider involving members. The little bit that Sharon said about hate crime and safety, also including considering the inclusion of head teachers from SND provisions, and also to look into enhancing or, where appropriate, using the hospice service for children at life-end care.
I think picking up the point from colleagues on the lack of impact data in the report, can we consider adding to the recommendations that future reports do show impact of the work undertaken? Because I think it's really important that we can judge the service from a number of different angles, but having some impact data would be really useful. Thank you.
Are you happy to? Yeah, thank you. That's a good point, Andrew. Thanks. We're still ahead of time, so it's the Council's performance monitoring report and strategic risk assessment, Q2, 2023 to 24, pages 117.
I think we just need to second and agree that.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
It's implied, but...
Yeah. Can we agree that, please? And please don't say I've got to repeat that again with frog in my throat. No. Is that all right? Just move on to number 8. Thank you. Sorry. Right.
Thank you, Chair. I'd really like to just give a couple of words before we take questions. The performance for children's social care there's a lot of reds. You will have seen that. Please remember that Q2, we were right in the middle of our ILACs. So some of it in terms of meeting timescales may well have come from an instruction from me that we must focus on quality rather than meeting a timescale. So what I'm trying to say, at that time we would have been slightly more risk averse than we usually are, for obvious reasons, so please keep that in mind. I think you will see improvements as we go through the different quarters of the year. But I'll just take questions, Chair.
Thank you, Leanne, for your honesty. Questions? Andrew?
Chair, just one comment and then a question. I think, like a lot of risk reports or performance reports, we don't actually see if it's an up or down, i.e., has it improved since the last report, or has as it was since the last report. It would be nice to see just a simple symbol that shows it's improved or it's got worse. That was my comment. A question... does it? Oh, right, okay. Well, I didn't read the report properly then, did I? I was at the Corporate Parenting Board, I think, Joe, we were online, and I was shocked to see that 55% of children leaving our care are classed as NEETs. But on this report, only 7% are classed as NEETs. And I wonder whether it would be, if I can indulge the committee and officers, if we could have a separate separate performance on children leaving care as NEETs. Because I think it's a very large number, or a very large percentage of children leaving care are not in education or training. And I think we're failing those young people if we're not aware of that performance. And I don't know where else in the council's meeting cycle would that number actually have come out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your point, Andrew. What we'll do is, like we did on Canadian cabs, we'll provide a briefing paper on that to suffice.
Chair, it doesn't need a briefing paper. I just think we need, because we understand, because we had a briefing paper at the Corporate Parenting Board, didn't we? It was there. But for me, I just wonder how this committee can monitor that group progressing from being in care to actually being adults, getting into work, more training and everything else. Thank you.
Is that because... sorry. I think that's because the numbers are, you know, we know how many children we've got in care. I mean, the Fisher Family Trust and all sorts of school data statistics, chairs of governors have access to that. Certainly, you are entitled to ask. And certainly, I was 30 years a school governor, got invited to Queen's Garden Party. I didn't go, but as for being a governor, longevity. But you have the right to request that. So I always requested that in the autumn term.
Thank you. So obviously the NEET figure is cyclic. We know at this time of, well, the start of the academic year, it's higher and it drops. We do a much more detailed NEET report broken down on all of the groups. We do that internally, monthly, and a report has come to this board specifically on NEETs, and the NEET team come and present that. So that has been a previous one, and if it needs to come again with the next one, we can do that. The Corporate Parenting Board, absolutely, and the Partnership Board for the virtual school scrutinise that data in a lot more detail as well and monitor it. But for this board, the NEET report comes as a separate item, and we can share that last one with you as well.
Okay. Just one comment on that, Celia. At the Corporate Parenting Board, I was told off for being too scrutiny. And the person who told me off is sitting to your right because I was asking more scrutiny questions. So I understand you don't want to include it in this and you might bring this back at another time. It just struck me as quite a shocking number.
So we actually
personally
have very few children in care or leaving care that go on to be NEET. It does vary, but the percentage is high because the number is so low. So, but that detail, we are absolutely on supporting all of those children. We have staff dedicated to that in terms of aspiration officers that really work with those young people.
Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure it's really a question apart from being a rhetorical one, but it seems to me that with these red areas, there needs to be a focus on getting things right in the early years, if I'm not stating the too obvious in terms of that. You know, things like the initial children and family assessments, ILAC 4, or perhaps a better example, the ILAC 5, percentage of children with long-term fostering as a plan, where the child carer and service have agreed for the placement to last until the child is ready to leave care. I think it's my general point that we need to attack the reds in the early years so that we get things right by the time the child reaches adolescence and reaches the age to leave care. I don't think anybody would necessarily agree with me necessarily disagree with what I'm saying on that. It's perhaps a point to note. Thank you.
Thank you. Noted. Smither, then George.
Thanks, Joe. I mean, there's obviously the, no, let me start by saying excellent work again, Children's Services. It's always great to see the greens, and it's a very encouraging report in many parts. There are, of course, reds that are of concern, typically around the caseload of social workers and the number of case reviews that are audited and are graded good or outstanding. But we've addressed this in previous meetings and in various forms in this meeting. I know the efforts that are being put in place to recruit and train social workers, so I won't go, but they are of interest because that is a worrying red there. What I do want to raise is on page 145, the percentage of children who achieve the required standard or above in reading, writing, and maths at KS2. So it's 55%, which means nearly half of the children don't achieve the required standard in reading, writing, and maths. And in the comments below, it basically describes that we've gotten worse, especially compared to the national standard. So I just wanted to get your view on that. That's worrying because if kids can't read, write, or do maths when they're leaving Key Stage 2, I mean, that sounds like the schools are failing those kids. You can't really be prepared for life if you don't get the basic things right there. Thank you.
Celia, please.
Thank you. So yes, that's the partnership measure in terms of the outcomes that children receive in schools. It is worth noting that is provisional data, but it has shown that our decline, certainly since the pandemic, has been greater than the national decline, has been a national decline. We are working on a literacy strategy across the council. We have at your next scrutiny meeting the annual schools report, which will drill down into those measures in a bit more detail in terms of which groups are performing and how they're performing. And then it is work that we are doing with our Medway Education Partnership and with the schools to look at increasing those outcomes. But you're right, that is a worrying trend that we have dropped lower than national.
Thank you, Celia. George.
Thank you. Actually, my question's been answered, actually, but was part of what Smith was saying, so that's all good. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And just to follow on from that, I mean, a lot of the education KPIs are not looking that brilliant. And given that, as you mentioned, this is very much a partnership thing, and a lot of these schools are not within the purview of us as an education authority. I think it's high time that we have the opportunity to scrutinise somebody from the regional director's office. It's my understanding that requests have been made to that end and we've been rebuffed. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I really think we need to have that opportunity as a committee. And I see there's one or two nods around the room, so I think it's across the chamber view on that, because these trends have been quite long-standing now, some of these, and we're not seeing any movement. And just another one that we're not seeing much movement on is ILAC 7. Notwithstanding, Leanne, your comments earlier about that, but it would be nice to see some movement in ILAC 7. It seems to have been lurking in the low percentages now for quite a while. Can you give us an idea when we might sort of see it come up a little bit more? Thank you.
Certainly, Leah, George and myself have commented. I know Schools Regional Officer meets with Celia, but we did want them to come to overview and scrutiny. We have indeed been rebuffed, so we're considering doing a draft letter to the Minister for Education to find out that if we are worried, why can't we not have anybody accountable for our worries?
Thank you, Councillor. These set of measures, of course, were part of the improvement journey. It's my view at the appropriate time these measures need looking at because they're not nuanced enough, and I know you and I have previously had this conversation, so I would anticipate at the appropriate time these measures could be better. Now we are good.
Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you, Leah.
The bulk load of my question was pretty much what Councillor Goldman said, but followed by the regional directors thing. And so I know we've half drafted a letter and then we can send that out. So that's that bit. On page 123, there was the bit about excess weight. And it says that it can be broken down to show links in gender and so on. And it also says it can be broken down to show links in deprivation. I wondered if the data does show a link in like the deprivation of a ward and how likely the children are to be obese. And then I had one. No, that was it. The other one was also covered, so just that, please.
Can you do that one, please?
Yeah, so... sorry, could you just repeat that part of the question around the obesity, childhood obesity?
So basically just does the data show a link between the deprivation of an area where the child is living and how likely they are to be obese at either age?
Yeah. Sorry, yeah. So the data is done at a granular level with regards to National Child Measurement Programme and the obesity rate. So we can go down to, I think, LSOA area. It means also we can make sure that the coverage across the piece is good as well. Because one of the things years ago when I was doing the Health Isn't Commissioning piece is if you've got a percentage coverage of National Child Measurement Programme, you wouldn't know if you've got 100% in Walderslade, for example, and only 30% of young people have actually been measured in Luton, for example. So we've got much better coverage there. So the information is available to you. It should be via the JSNA website around that granular data. Nationally, you will see there does tend to be a trend between deprivation and childhood obesity. But a lot of the initiatives that are out there at the moment, so Holiday Activity Food Programme and all of those sorts of things, are working towards bringing those inequalities down effectively.
Thank you. Anybody else? Vice Chair.
So I move that we note the report.
And can I add, consider doing a cross-party letter to the Secretary of Education regarding standards in some, mainly academy schools in Medway, but the downward trajectory.
I think I missed that had changed since we spoke about it before. But yeah, I move that we note the report and draft a letter between us about getting the regional director in here. Just a second.
Thank you, Smith, for seconded. Right, we're on item number 10, work programme. Steve, who I've been calling James all night. I'm so sorry, I'm so dosed up. A million apologies.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. So I will keep this very brief. Obviously, the work programme is as stated. I would just like to remind members the next data workshop will take place on the 9th of January, and that will relate to school performance data. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy with the work programme. Anyone want to make any contributions? No. I do think, in the light of the lovely marketing for social workers and how vibrant and attractive that was, whether we would consider perhaps adding how we as a group can engage and interact and get feedback from children that can be triangulated in terms of, you know, there's so much good child-friendly Medway. Dickens was fabulous at the weekend. It was so wonderful to see awe and wonder, if you like, on many of our children's faces, and parents, you know, engaging, and from babies onwards. What can we learn from that about, as a committee, how we engage with the community that we're serving, which is children and young people in Medway, so that they have the best voice to us?
So I move that we note the report and agree the work programme and look into ways of engaging more young people. So I agree the work programme is set out in Appendix 1 to the report, subject to accepting the proposed changes outlined in italic text on Appendix 1, and that we look into ways of engaging young people.
Is that seconded? That's the end of the meeting. I'm so sorry I've been groggy this evening, and thank you all for your kindness and expertise and hard work. Good night.
you.